All right. Everyone warm and full of pizza? Yeah? Great. Good evening. Thank you all for being here today, tonight, on a cold December day in between two holidays. We appreciate it. We're thrilled to bring you a unique event tonight to not only entertain you, as it is a play, but highlight a societal issue, and as is the CAP way, offer solutions. My name is Megan Shahi. I'm the Director of Technology Policy here at the Center for American Progress, and our team, combined with the events team here at CAP and the incredible folks at the Theater and Policy Salon, are delighted to welcome you to this staged reading of Imposed, a one-act play by Ben Hatt. Though the exponential growth of artificial intelligence has brought forth many societal benefits, its unregulated proliferation carries many risks. Generative AI can be used to digitally alter or recreate a person's identity through audio, photography, and video. These deepfakes, as they have come to be known, can be used to depict non-consensual intimate imagery, or NCII, a profound violation of an individual's privacy and bodily autonomy. It has been shown that up to 95% of all deepfakes on the internet today depict some form of NCII, with the vast majority targeting women and girls. Imposed was written by CAP alumni Ben Hatt, who is a playwright, speechwriter, and screenwriter. Tonight's performance will last for approximately 35 minutes, followed by a question and answer session with Ben and Becca Branham, Deputy Director at the Center for Democracy and Technology. As conversations about the misuse of deepfake technology take center stage, Imposed could not be more salient. The play follows two young women who live and work in Washington, D.C., as they discover that AI-generated explicit content depicting their likeness is being circulated online. As they rush to discover who is responsible for creating and sharing these deepfakes and why, they contend with the fact that virtually no laws exist today to hold the perpetrators accountable, nor compel online platforms to remove the content. The use and abuse of AI is a policy question, but it is also a human question. Addressing this duality through a combination of theater and expertise discussion allows us to consider this topic in a fresh and thoughtful manner. We hope that this audience empathizes and learns from the plight of the play's protagonists and uses it as a jumping-off point for meaningful discussion about the regulation of artificial intelligence and prohibition of non-consensual intimate imagery. Thank you, and enjoy the show. As they get seated, there was like a collective kind of like, I think, breath taken out of the room at the end there, and probably for good reason. But one more round of applause for Ben and team for bringing that to us. I'm really excited about this conversation. The juices are all very much flowing, and now we kind of dive into the what next. I want to briefly introduce the two folks here before we dig in. So Becca Branham is the Deputy Director of the Center for Democracy and Technology, CDT, as it's known, their Free Expression Project. The Free Expression Project works to promote law and policy that support internet users' free expression rights, often focused on issues of content moderation, intermediary liability, and transparency and accountability. While at CDT, Becca has spoken on the subject of non-consensually distributed images and the tools necessary to protect both victims and free expression. Prior to joining CDT, Becca was senior counsel for Tammy Baldwin. Becca began her career at the Consortium on Law and Values in Health, Environment, and Life Sciences, and previously served as a law clerk on the Senate Judiciary Committee on Privacy, Technology, and the Law. And then, of course, we have former capper Ben Hatt, whose distinguished bio is on the other page of my notes. Always a struggle. Ben is a speechwriter, screenwriter, and playwright based here in DC. In his speechwriting capacity, he has written for current senior officials including our very own Patrick, in the White House, CEOs, members of Congress, ambassadors, state government officials, and celebrities. He currently works in executive comms at Global Refuge, one of the nation's largest immigration and refugee resettlement organizations, and was previously the speechwriter here at CAP, as I said. He's written on a range of topics from economic policy to climate change, gun rights, and the state of the U.S. democracy. As a playwright, his work has been featured in several productions in New York City. Next year, his play Drink in Moderation, which explores the psychological impact of social media content moderation, will be produced in DC in partnership with the Theater and Policy Salon, who has worked with us to bring you the event today. So with these two and their esteemed bios, I want to start with you, Ben. Congratulations to you and everyone for bringing this to life. This was really special to watch and very creative and captivating. What was the creative process like for you in developing this? And what inspired you to really write the play? And what did your sort of research to bring it to life entail?
Well, thank you again, and thanks to Kat for putting this on. And I just want to do an extra acknowledgement to the actors, to Walker, to Jenna and Julia, and also to Michael, who was the director and also the voice of the stage reading. So, well, I think I wasn't initially intending to write a play about this topic. You mentioned Drink in Moderation, which is the play we're putting on next year. I'd sort of been drawn into writing that play, and I think it sort of gravitated me towards the topic of technology and the use and abuse of it. And I think it's, this is an area where there's huge innovation and advancement, but laws, tools, and accountability aren't keeping pace. And I think that's a space that is rich to explore kind of the good in people and the bad in people, because the norms of what is right and wrong haven't really been established yet. So I think when I was sort of gravitating towards this space, and I actually read an article of a very similar case to this in the UK, where the male best friend of a woman had taken images that he had, they'd taken together and sent it to someone online who had then made them into explicit material. And at the time, this was a few years ago, there were no robust laws in the UK dealing with that. And so he ended up getting away with a 2-year suspended sentence and paying, I think, £100 to each of the 15 victims that he had done this to, which I thought was quite a slap in the face, and it made me quite upset. And in the UK, there have been new laws that have been passed in the past few years, but it got me down the rabbit hole of looking really at what's happening in the United States, and I just felt that the accountability is not there right now. And so I've always been gravitated towards plays where there's a miscarriage of justice, and I think that was very clear in this play.
Thank you, Becca. That brings us over to you. What is the state of play on this policy issue? We are a think tank, so we got to bring policy in. What tools exist or should exist to hold perpetrators accountable, like what we saw was lacking in the play, and kind of what inspired Ben to write this in the first place? What is the state of play in the U.S., at the states, at the federal level? What kind of things should exist to kind of plug this gap going forward?
Yeah, I think when talking about this issue, it's helpful to think about NDII, or non-consensual distribution of intimate imagery, more broadly. For as long as humans have been able to capture their own images and other people's images, they've taken intimate images of themselves and others and shared them. It's a really common form of sexual expression. And as we've had phones in or cameras in our phones, it's become that much easier to take these images and share them. It's also become that much easier for them to be shared outside the confines of the consent in which they were shared. And so by now, every state except for South Carolina has some kind of law on the books addressing the non-consensual disclosure of intimate images, either a criminal law or a civil law, where if I'm depicted somewhere, I could go to court and sue my abuser. These laws vary Not all of them are particularly strong. It can be really hard to have a cause of action taken up by a prosecutor, for example. They're drawn in about 50 different directions, and this might not make the cut for what they're going to prosecute. They might not have the information they need to do so. But also not all of them cover synthetic intimate imagery, which is what we're seeing more people pay attention to now. Because where before it had to be an actual image, we now have the technology for anyone whose image appears outside their phone or whose image is captured anywhere, for primarily open source technology to be utilized to then create out of whole cloth a new depiction of them they never consented to either create or distribute. And this has rightly captured the attention of federal policymakers. There are three primary bills that are floating about in Congress right now. The first is called the SHIELD Act. This has been a long-term priority for many in Congress and deals primarily with real intimate image depictions and would criminalize that at the federal level. And that has passed the Senate. It's awaiting passage in the House. Another would modify, it's called the Defiance Act. And when Congress last reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act, they, for the first time, created a federal civil cause of action for people whose actual intimate visual depictions were published without their consent. The Defiance Act would clarify this language to make it crystal clear that also covers synthetic intimate imagery. So if I never consented to its distribution, I could then sue my abuser in court and get damages for that. That has also passed the Senate, is awaiting passage in the House. The last bill that's under consideration, I think, fully encompasses, or more fully encompasses, what the play brought forward and sort of the breadth of solutions that are needed by pairing the SHIELD Act's criminal prohibition on the distribution of images ensures that synthetic intimate images are included in that criminal prohibition, but also would mandate a notice and takedown system by platforms that have this image, wherein someone could report to a platform that this image is posted, they never consented to its distribution, and then would require that it be taken down. That's still working its way through Congress, but it does create an important, we think, mechanism for victims who might not have the evidence to go to a prosecutor, might not have the will or desire to sue their abuser in court, but nevertheless want to stop that abuse right now and have that tool to force that image to be taken down.
Thank you. That's really helpful. In the play, we see how they find out that the content started on Reddit, right? That was the platform mentioned in the play. And one of these takedown mechanisms that Becca mentioned would allow the victims to be able to go to Reddit's help page or to Snapchat's help page or any platform and actually fill out a form there and get copies of that content taken down, which I think, in a world where you can't figure out who has done it, unlike in the play where we know who created and spread the imagery, in a world where you can't hold somebody criminally liable for it, that takedown mechanism offers a way to hold platforms accountable for content that is being distributed on their platforms. Which brings my kind of follow-up question. In the U.S., when we think about regulation on social media and just digital platforms and holding them accountable broadly, the question of the First Amendment comes up before anyone can finish their sentence. And so with that, Becca, how do you think about free expression and this issue and protecting Section 230, or where do you stand on kind of the intersection of the two issues?
Sure. I think for CDT, free expression is really central to how we understand it's sort of the functioning of our democracy and how people can actualize their human rights and communicating with one another. And so when we're approached with questions about sort of dueling commitments between wanting to acknowledge the very real harms that people experience while also acknowledging that these online intermediaries are necessary for people to protest, to petition the government, to meet one another, to express themselves online. For people in unsafe homes who are exploring their own identity, they can find people they need online, right? These intermediaries, although they do facilitate and sort of serve as the technology through which a lot of bad things can happen, they also serve as the technology through which almost all human communication now occurs, and so it's a really tricky balancing act. That said, our eyes are not shut to the very real harms that occur online. And so it's a balancing act between recognizing the importance of human communication and how tricky it can be to regulate online speech while also needing to find solutions that are responsive. And if there's a minute, I want to run through an example that I think is particularly
please.
illustrative of this point, particularly on the point that well-intentioned laws that everyone agrees are addressing a very real problem, if not written appropriately, can have some unintended consequences. So a few years ago, there was a bill called Sesta Fosta that passed that attempted to create civil liability, or criminal, both civil and criminal liability, for facilitating sex trafficking online. Obviously coming from a really good place, wanting to address the exploitation of women and LGBTQ people primarily who are being sex trafficked, et cetera. The way it was written, however, was not entirely precise, and in implementation led to the takedown, for fear of liability, of a lot of sex-adjacent content. And so we saw disproportionately information relating to LGBTQ identity and trans people in particular being taken down because given a choice between liability and keeping and sort of taking on that liability or keeping content up, a profit-driven actor may rationally choose, it's just easier to take that content down, even if it's not exactly what Congress was going for. And I think that's a really helpful illustration for how tricky some of these questions can be without denying the real harm that's there. And it's just a question of needing to go back to the drawing board and make sure that we're targeting directly the very real harms that we have in mind.
Yeah, so much of regulation on anything, but especially on tech issues and speech, is about value trade-offs, I find. And in the European context, we see the Digital Services Act or the EU AI Act that favor things like privacy and safety over innovation and national security. And in the US, the freedom or the value of free speech and the value of national security and protectionism tend to kind of beat out things like individual privacy, which is why we don't have a federal privacy bill. And so as we think about those values, which ones we prioritize absolutely carry trade-offs against potential harms and outcomes. And that very much applies to the issue of non-consensual imagery. Shifting gears a little bit, Ben, Kate and Allie had really different reactions in the play to their likeness being kind of posted online. What can we kind of learn from the difference in how they reacted as a character study and as like an everyday reality to these really kind of tough moments and the way we move forward?
Yeah, I think before I answer that, I think it's you're talking about the trade-offs as well, and I think what I hope this play does is it shows what's at stake with those trade-offs. These characters are working through their whole lives being turned upside down, and so when we're considering what those trade-offs are, we have these very real circumstances where people are having reputational damage, psychological damage. We don't get to see the mental health implications of what happens in this play. But I think, I hope that this play really shows that visceral trade-off that we're having to make when we're deciding, that balance between expression and privacy and things like that. But yeah, to speak to their different responses to what happens, I think they both go through different stages of grief, really. They go through anger, they go through denial. At the end, they're trying to bargain with Mark. So they both go through that, but that manifests in very different ways for both of them. But that emotional arc is still there. And I think what I was trying to do in trying to give them distinct arcs is to show that, like, victimhood or being the victim of something doesn't look the same. People express themselves in very different ways. And I think we shouldn't just expect someone to react to this, to this psychological damage, this emotional damage, this reputational damage in the same way. People sometimes, and you see this at various points in the play, like they put on their armor. They try and project strength. But ultimately, and we see that, sometimes we see victims who project strength. But ultimately, like, their lives have been turned upside down by this. And I think that's where it all leads at the end to this sense of solidarity, because what Mark has done to them is made them feel so incredibly alone and broken, because who wants to talk about these topics? You know, if someone makes explicit imagery of you, how easy is it to go out there and say, this happened to me? You know, not only has he damaged them, but he's put them in a place where they feel so alone. And so I think that's where, you know, they have their differences in the emotional arc, but ultimately they come together at the end of the play, they hold hands just as they're about to open the door, and it's that sense of solidarity that I think is important, because it's not just them that need to share in that solidarity. It's important for all of us, when people have these experiences, to make people not feel alone in going through them.
Absolutely, that kind of humanness of that moment, especially when I believe it's Allie is shaking as she sees it. Like that was very relatable for me, just to see her kind of first notice it on the screen and then start shaking. Like, I have not gone through that exact scenario, but that very humanness of, oh my God, shit, and then complete lack of ability to like control the situation is what a lot of the legislation seeks to solve. So we have a mixed audience of all kinds, not just policy, not just kind of artists, but everything in between. What is 1 to 3 things that each of you hopes that everyone in this audience will kind of take out of this conversation and into the world? Is it advocacy? Is it knowledge? Is it the awareness? Is it what are the things and the tools to equip this group?
Sure. I think to the point about that was made earlier, I hope people take from this sort of just how human and real a problem this is, even if the answers to getting how to solve it and addressing it are tricky, and they are, right? There aren't, it's all of this legislation and everything in the tech space is challenging with the trade-offs that we're talking about. But there are real harms happening here that are worth addressing. And those trade-offs are worth addressing and thinking about critically in a way that is both protective of people's human rights, but also recognizing that while we might be having to address free expression issues, we're also, by allowing this to continue unfettered and without thinking critically about it, we're also harming the victim's own rights to free expression, right? We see a lot of this intimate imagery abuse happening to women who are prominent in public life, right? Who are activists, who are politicians, who then are being depicted in ways they never consented to. And I shudder to think of women and girls who are growing up and dreaming big dreams, but have to wonder if, because they dare to speak out, because they dare to have views, someone's going to victimize them in that way. That minimizes their free expression rights and their expressions and ability to succeed, and that's worth balancing too. And so I think this play did an incredible job of emphasizing just how worthy a problem this is to solve, and I hope we can all commit to moving forward in thoughtful and rights-protecting ways to do so.
Thank you, Ben.
I think a couple of things. I think, you know, we've talked a lot about the emotional arc of Ali and Kate in the play and the impact on them, but I think it's important also to consider Mark. You know, technology is a tool, but how you choose to use that tool is dependent on who we are as human beings. So why is it that Mark chooses to do that? And Mark is not alone in doing this, unfortunately. I saw the other day a statistics that the FT put out, the Financial Times, that said and this is slightly different, but it's still related, that in September of this year alone, 32 million people globally went on apps that will take a picture where you can upload a picture and it will nudify or undress someone. 32 million people. So you've got to ask yourself the question of, like, well, why are people doing that? Why are people choosing to use these tools? Why are people choosing to create these tools? So I think, you know, beyond the discussion around technology, there's a much broader conversation to be had around why are mostly men doing this to mostly women. So I think that's something that I hope that people take away kind of from this, from seeing this play. And I also think, you know, again, related to Mark, it's the reason why he gets to where he does is because he bottles up his upset and he doesn't feel like he has any anywhere to express it. He's a very lonely individual, and that loneliness, the worst form of him finds kind of expression cloaked in the anonymity of the internet. That's where he can go to find his community. That's where he goes to find someone who's willing to make these images for free. And so you worry that the worst forms of who we are can be kind of validated on the internet if we're not careful. And so I think like that's one thing that I think I want to people to take away, and I think to think about with these people who are capable of doing these things. You know, I was sort of thinking about it earlier that, you know, you can lessen an explosion by opening the valve earlier. If the pressure builds, then the explosion is going to be bigger. It's the same thing with human beings. If we can build a society and build outlets for individuals so that they don't get to the point where someone like Mark gets to, then hopefully we can have a more caring and compassionate society. But if there aren't avenues for people like Mark to clumsily and angrily kind of express themselves, then that just gets more and more of a pressure cooker. So I think as much as the discussion is about Ali and Kate, we also need to consider Mark. And then the last thing I'll say is that I hope that this evening, this panel discussion, is an expression or an example of how wonderful and important the kind of partnership between theatre and art and policy can be. You know, we were expressing a very human and emotional story of what can happen when policy is lacking. And policy can so often be this kind of esoteric thing. Theatre is emotional. Humans are emotional. And so marrying those two things and being able to say, look, here's the problem, and policy can be the solution, I think is a very powerful and important thing to do.
Thank you. Last question from me. Oh, did I hear a... Okay. Last question from me, and then we'd love to hear from you all. If this were a 2-act play, what would lie ahead for our protagonists in Act 2? Both of you, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, I'll hand it to you first.
I love this question because I think, I mean, it's obviously left on a cliffhanger. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. I think there's a good idea of what's going to happen. But I think there's what I would like to see, and there's kind of what I would fear to see. I think what I would like to see is that kind of Ali and Kate become reluctant heroes in sort of speaking up about the damage of what happened to them, and they become voices for change, and they can encourage others to see just how damaging the kind of current set of tools and circumstances are, and that it could lead to real change. That's what I would like to see. But what I fear is that they would their circumstance would become a talking point or an article for a day or two, mostly because of the kind of sensationalization of the fact that there's kind of that violent act. But ultimately, as things are at the moment, it's much easier to prosecute someone like Ali who physically assaults someone like Mark than it is to prosecute someone like Mark who has done what he has done. And I fear that second act would be that second act would go in that direction, and that ultimately Ali would be the one who suffers the most.
Becca.
So I also love this question. And as an eternal optimist, I couldn't do this work if I wasn't eternally optimistic that things can get better. I'm going to skip right over Act 2, assuming that in Act 2 they work it out, they find a sympathetic prosecutor who understands what's going on, and then we skip to Act 3, wherein I have been cast alongside the two of them, and we are.
I love it. I'm going to take notes.
Where we are working together. In the halls of Congress to lift their stories up. Some of the most impactful work I've done over my career are alongside people who have been able to take their hurt and their experience and give voice for other people and move that forward for real change. It's hard work, and people should never be forced into that position. But as much as I focus on policy, I read policy papers and look at charts, nothing's more important on Capitol Hill than a good story, right? And that requires people giving voice to their experiences. And thankfully in this space, we do have people doing that right now. And it's so incredible to see that work. And so that is my hope for Act 3, leading to a happy ending at the end where we will have given people meaningful recourse against this really horrific abuse.
On that positive note, thank you both. Round of applause for these two. And yeah, I already see a hand. Amazing. We have Billy running a mic around the room. We're happy to take questions. And if you can introduce your name and affiliation as well.
Sure. So Michael Hawes, I'm a longstanding federal privacy professional. So first off, loved the play. I thought it did a fantastic job of highlighting a really kind of vexing current issue that's at the crux of privacy policy and technology. But as with so many things where you have like kind of privacy policy and technology kind of intersecting, there's often kind of a question of, okay, how do you devise solutions that actually get at the underlying issue without it being either too context specific or too technology specific? So my question for the panelists is, okay, if you took the scenario of the play and tweaked it ever so slightly in one way or another. So like what if Allie, if the deep fake was of Allie doing illegal drugs, or if the deep fake was Allie was a vegan and it was her eating bacon, or on the flip side, get the technology out of the way, what if it was a photorealistic oil painting of her doing sexually explicit acts, or a very obvious kind of edited photo, one where it was clear that it wasn't actually her doing it? How might the public policy implications or the potential solutions differ in those contexts is my question.
Fantastic question. Becca, you want to take a stab?
Sure. I'll pick up, I think, on two threads of that, because it's a fascinating question and one definitely worth thinking about. I think, you know, if I was depicted doing illegal drugs, or, you know, doing something that's contrary to my own values, I think that's problematic. And given, I think the cultural context matters quite a bit too. What we here in America might think of as particularly harmful might differ in other countries too, depending on sort of the religious or other cultural context. I think there is something unique about intimate imagery. There's literally nothing more private than sort of how we choose to present our bodies and who we choose to show our bodies to. And so I think it is worth thinking uniquely and specifically about intimate imagery and non-consensual intimate imagery as its own problem, because I do think there are unique considerations to keep in mind, and I do think it's a unique privacy harm. To your point on sort of the tweaking things ever so slightly, it's worth thinking about. So there's a website that will remain nameless because there are lots of horrible things that happen there. But if you go there, it's exclusively synthetic intimate imagery. And they're all labeled fake, right? Fake, this celebrity, fake, and it's pornography, right? So everyone seeing this image knows it's fake. But it's still the person's likeness depicted in things they never consented to in a horribly invasive way. To me, that's every bit as offensive. Or at least it's a very similar offense than as a depiction that everyone believes, right? A lot of what we're seeing online right now are depictions of really prominent people. So people suspect it isn't real. That doesn't mean it's not a horrifying invasion of privacy. And so I think it's worth thinking about what's unique about synthetic intimate imagery to me is that really unique privacy invasion. And the believability about it doesn't necessarily factor in, or at least it factors in a different way than it might for other types of depictions.
I think that I totally agree with that. I think, you know, you understand in the play that these aren't sort of perfectly done images. Like she talks about seeing the bike helmet and stuff like that. Like these aren't images that a reasonable person would think would be authentic, but that doesn't really matter. The reputational damage is still there. The psychological damage is still there. The humiliation is still there. The sort of assertion of control that the perpetrator has in saying, I can do this to you and I can humiliate you, is still there. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect for it still to be damaging. So I think that that's a really important thing to consider. And I think but to pick up on one thing you said, I think there are different roles in this type of imagery getting out. You have people who create it, you have people who disseminate it, you have the website that allows you to do it. In this case, it's rather unique as well, in that Mark provides the image, but he doesn't create the image. And as far as the play, sort of the information that the play provides, he doesn't actually share the image even. So what questions can we ask about the culpability of someone who merely provides the, the ammunition, so to speak, for someone to then do this to someone else, even if they haven't created it or they haven't disseminated, but they're still part of it. So I think there are so many aspects to it that that need to be addressed. But as you say, there are also when you address those aspects, there are other variables that you also have to consider.
The one frame I would put around this is at CAP, we think a lot about regulation of AI in a very broad swath kind of context. And it's a problem that no one has tackled yet for good reason. It's exceptionally difficult. And we analyze a lot of kind of parallels that exist in other regulatory schemes in the US. So you can think of the FDA or the CFPB, and then other AI regulatory schemes that exist around the world, the most notable, the EU AI Act. And there is no kind of silver bullet way to regulate AI, but what we've learned is that you can do it based on risk, you can do it based on application, you can do it kind of as a hybrid approach, you can think about the uniqueness of the privacy violation of NCII and the fact that depicting somebody eating bacon, even though they're vegan, does not pose that same level of risk or that same invasiveness of privacy. And so, so much of it is nuanced and contextual to the situation. And so the three bills that Becca mentioned kind of seek to target this problem in its uniqueness, right? It's not, and one of them in particular is about not actually deepfakes. It's like actual intimate imagery, and another is about deepfakes to exactly get at some of these nuances between different types of violations of that nature. Another question? It's all who Billy gives the mic to.
Hi, my name's Haya. I work at CAP and got to witness Ben's brilliance on his team when he worked here. I'm so proud of you. And since this was a one-act play, you didn't have time to delve into this, and this kind of goes into the Eternal Optimist, Act 3, whatever. But what's your balance as an artist when you're tackling societal problems of injecting policy ideas, and quickly that can become cringeworthy, and then people won't actually take the content seriously? So what's your balance of that and being so pessimistic, but also, laying out the scenario and letting policymakers be like, oh no, this is a problem, let's be creative about it? And then for Becca, kind of like how much do you wish art would inject your ideal policy ideas into it, and how much, they don't need to tackle that, leave it to the experts?
Well, I hope I struck the right balance that it wasn't cringeworthy. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think when you go into art wanting when you go into art and your message first, you really run the risk of doing something that isn't very human and very applicable, and you're putting policy or you're putting a discussion before you're putting the story of people. And I think what always is my way into wanting to tell a story is being interested in characters and circumstances. And if that is your way in, you're like, oh, well, there's this circumstance, and then you have the alchemy of this type of character. Maybe you bring in another character to kind of bounce off of that. How would they handle this situation? I think if you lead with that, then it can take you into a direction where art is kind of leading the way into a discussion like we're having now, rather than the other way around. And I think the other big thing when it comes to kind of, writing plays or writing works that cause us to think about these kind of bigger issues is, this is me personally, I find it easier to go into something where I really don't know the answer. Like, I don't know what the right law is, or I don't know how you could wave a magic wand and everything would be fine. And you have this constant, as we've discussed, this balance between expression, privacy, and the stakes that there are to that. So I think as long as you're as a writer, like trying to just explore humans navigating a very messy and clumsy world, then you're more likely to bring in an authenticity to the art that can then bring in a policy discussion.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement, and I think art is particularly well suited to keeping policy conversations grounded in actual human experience, right? We spend a lot of time thinking about evidence-based policymaking, and that's really important, but that's often not really what drives people in policy conversations. It's our values and what we care about, and that's not something you're going to find in a chart. That's not something you're going to find in a thesis, right? It's about the human experience, and particularly in tech policy, where it can get wonky really, really fast. I love the idea of actually reminding people that we care about these things because we care about people and the human experience, and I think that should be absolutely part of the conversation of figuring out these policy solutions, because what looks good on paper might not work for actual people and what people are actually experiencing, and so I love the melding of the two.
Last question.
Hi, I'm Dennis King. For the playwright, I was wondering if AI could write your play.
I don't know. It would be a self-destructive play if it did. I think to the broader question of like, we're seeing such a sort of invasion is probably a word that gives away my feeling of sort of AI tools to that's moving into the arts. And I think we're seeing in a lot of ways writers, actors have questions around that. I still think, and I will always believe, and I will die on this hill, that people are better at communicating with other people than computers or AI will ever be. And I think what kind of a society, and I worry about this a little bit because I do think that unfortunately there are not people who don't believe that, but what kind of a society do we end up being if we just have AI formulated content communicating with AI formulated content, and that sort of ping pong match becomes what we're an audience to, like who is actually communicating with one another. So I think that there is an intrinsic value to people sharing their art always.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight. And thank you, Becca and Ben, and our lovely actors.